Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our Ask a Grad Student virtual panel. My name is Mark Linker. I'm going to be one of your hosts today. I'm a teaching and learning librarian at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and I'm the incoming convener for ACRL's interest group for academic library services for graduate students. My co-host is Hannah Gasho-Rempel, science librarian at Oregon State University and the convener of the interest group. I feel like our interest group has really been taking off this year, and a lot of that is due to Hannah's vision and dedication. So thanks, Hannah. And a word about today's panel discussion. Several of you sent in questions via the Padlet app on our ACRL LibGuide. Thank you very much for those excellent questions. Those will be our focus for the first 40 to 45 minutes of our time together today. And then at that point, we'll change gears and address the questions you send in via the chat on the Zoom conferencing software. But the most important part of any panel is the panelists. So let's meet our panel of real live graduate students that we've gathered for you today. Let's start with Jasmine Brown. She's pursuing her MS in Forest Ecosystems and Society with a minor in Ethnic Studies. She's doing that at Oregon State University. Jasmine, I understand that you have lived in 7 states and worked in 12. How did that happen?
I'm from Connecticut. I knew at a very young age that I wanted to travel and end up anywhere but Connecticut. So that's basically how I ended up getting a traveling job in forestry, where I got sent to a different national forest across the United States every month.
That sounds great. Wow, what an experience. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Also at Oregon State is Callie Damshin. She's pursuing her master's degree in English literature and culture. And Callie, when you shared your information with us, you said that you were 3 days away from completing an important milestone in your studies. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm 2 days away now from submitting my thesis. So here's hoping I survived the week. But yeah, I'll be sending it out to my committee on Thursday.
That's great. That's really exciting. I'm happy for you. And now academic librarians around the country are happy for you too. So congratulations on reaching this point. That's great.
Thank you.
All right. We've also got Jacqueline De Leon right here. She's pursuing a PhD in public health at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Her specialties are epidemiology and biostatistics. Jacqueline is also a veteran of the United States Air Force. And I understand that your service took you a long way from home. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, training was all done in Texas, and the duty station I had was in North Dakota. I am born and raised in San Diego, but my job in the Air Force was an optometry technician, and that allowed me to do humanitarian aid in Cameroon, Chad, and Ghana. And then I also served in an orphanage in Sri Lanka.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've had some amazing experiences. I'm very grateful for it.
Well, thank you for your service, and thank you for being here today. We've also got Caitlin DiBenedetto. She recently received her PhD in anthropology from UNLV and is currently working as a postdoctoral scholar with our graduate college. And in her work with the graduate college, she's been a really important collaborator with the libraries. So it's great to have her with us today. And her fun fact is that she's had some adventures in the Middle East.
Yes. Yeah, so I ran out of gas with a colleague in Jordan in the desert, so that was exciting.
Wow.
Totally our fault. You know, we had been in the field in Cyprus. My dissertation research was Cyprus. And we had been there for 2 months and were just totally exhausted. We wanted to go to Jordan and Israel because there's a lot of connections during this time period, and didn't pay attention to whether or not we had enough gas. So, lesson learned.
Wow.
Blinking gas gauge, not good.
Well, we're glad you got out of that and are able to join us today. That's great. Okay, let's take some of these questions. And I'm going to ask each question to a panelist, ask her to lead us off, but then other panelists, chime in as you have ideas about it as well. But first question is for Jacqueline, and this comes from Abby Bazile of Old Dominion University. What's the most valuable service that a campus offers to graduate students? I'm sorry, most valuable service a campus library offers to graduate students.
For me as a grad student, it was accessing articles, journals, and books through our campus campus library. And I didn't know about accessing these materials as an undergrad, but when I started to do research and you access this stuff on either Google Scholar or whatever other search engine you use, you would have to pay for it. So it's like $35 to get an article. But with this tool, I was very impressed that we are able to access so much through the library for free. So that was one of the #1 things for me when I became a grad student.
Excellent. Important to know about, for sure. Yes. Anything to add? We good? Okay.
I do have another.
Great.
Another thing I like is that each department, I believe, has their own librarian. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so I'm in the School of Public Health. We have our own librarian, so she knows specifically what to look for. So I'm in the health field. There's specific articles we're looking at, like PubMed, some other health journals, and she is trained to do that. And so I like that we can access her, make an appointment with her, and she can help us with very specific studies that we're doing.
Yeah, once you get to the grad level, that specialized.
It's very helpful, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, good. Our next question comes from my UNLV colleague, Katie Hauk at UNLV Health Sciences Library. How do you generally find out about events geared toward graduate students? And when do you usually find yourself seeking out activities that might support your education as a researcher? Callie, would you take this one?
Yeah. So I think the #1 way I probably hear about pretty much anything that's happening on campus is through email. I do think I'm more likely to pay attention to emails from my specific department. My department will share and promote a lot of things that are relevant to other English students. But I do also sometimes read emails from the graduate school that'll be like letting grad students know about things that are relevant to them. And in those cases, I'm more likely to notice if the subject line mentions something that is like clearly relevant to my interests. I do kind of skip over some of the emails that are like general summaries, and I've talked to some of my colleagues who also just don't read any of their emails. I do also use Facebook a fair bit. I'll hear about things that are going on campus when I see like Facebook events popping up in my feed. My program has like a Facebook group, and people will share things in there sometimes. So I'd say email and Facebook are the two main ways I find out about events. And as far as like when I find myself seeking out those kinds of opportunities, I'd say I was most active in that when I first started this program. So when I was a new student looking to kind of figure out like what resources were available, looking to connect with other grad students, and just get involved in the community, kind of feel more settled at home at Oregon State. I was much more active in like looking for events and reading through all of those things. So like early in the year, for example, rather than like later in the year, the more things are going on, I think the less likely I am to do anything extra.
Yeah, timing is very important, right? Right. Anything else, panelists? Okay, let's take the next question. This one's for Caitlin. So we talked about ways that people do hear about activities that the libraries offer, but how would you prefer to learn about services that the library offers for graduate students? What do you feel like we could do a better job of getting the word out on?
unique position in that one of my GA ships was actually through the grad college, and so I worked at the graduate college for 5 years of my degree program, and so I got a lot of this, that we're talking about today, like how do you reach graduate students, we really worked on. And I think some of the ways, and kind of like what Callie mentioned, so like social media we found is really, really important. Having Facebook live videos, that's really fun at events, because then they're like, hey, wait, where are they? Like, let's go. Hosting some of our workshops and our events actually in the libraries, so that we're using all spaces on campus, has been really important. And then I think the other thing that we've done is workshops. So we offer with all of our campus partners, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, I think we offer over 60 workshops a semester. It's unreal, between the grad college, the libraries, career services, faculty center, and other campus units. And one of the things that we've really worked on is streamlining everything so that they appear on one calendar for grad students. And that calendar is on the graduate college page. And so students know if they go to this calendar that has all of the workshops for that semester offered. And I think that's been really powerful in allowing grad students to see, what is being offered each semester. The other thing too that I think is really helpful in terms of like getting the word out about libraries is like going to events. So like we have new student orientation where, we'll have, booths for all of the campus resources. And then now I think we transitioned to doing it online. But just so, especially as when you're making that transition from undergrad to grad and like knowing about the libraries and all of the awesome resources that are being offered that you might not have known about as an undergrad, hitting them at sort of this critical orientation, I think is really, really helpful and will help them just down the line too. And so I think it's just like working with all the different campus partners to sort of get the message out about what each of us does and how we collaborate.
I would also like to add, it's really helpful to offer those workshops at different points in the year. I know that realizing that graduate students are at different points in their research. So if there is a workshop that's offered on data management and it's only offered once in the fall when everyone's just kind of getting introduced to their data, that sometimes is really tough for me to catch up to. But realizing that OSU will have a lot of workshops offered at each point in the term, I was like, oh, that's really helpful. So just in case you might miss it in the fall, you can still catch it at a later point in time. So that's really helpful too.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. And I think also filming workshops so that, if you do miss it because you're in class or in the lab, you can still watch it at a later date. So I think, and we get tons of requests for that. So I think that's also helpful when you're able to do that.
Do you find that people watch?
Yes, our YouTube hits are huge, which is really exciting. You're like, yes. So yeah, I think it's totally beneficial.
Yeah, I was just going to echo and say, I feel like I'd be much more likely to watch something online, because one of the big issues for me is just time commitments. So between class and work on campus, there are a lot of times where I just can't make it to extra things when they're scheduled. But then there are also just points in the term when I don't have the energy to stay on campus and do extra things, but I could see myself being a lot more likely to watch something at home in my pajamas and still get all the benefits out of it. So having those options available for different people, I think is really beneficial.
So is the easiest format just a YouTube video, would you say, or?
I think so, yeah, a YouTube video, and maybe having that also linked from the library website, so that there are a lot of different ways you could access that. But because you could really easily embed a YouTube video, you could share it on Facebook as well. So there would be different ways for people to access it. But that seems like a format that would be pretty workable.
We also do social media blasts too. So when we have a new YouTube video that's posted, we'll post on Facebook and LinkedIn, hey, check out. So I think that would be another way of making sure grad students saw that there was a new. I guess because we're not moving.
It's on a motion sensor. And, well. Nice. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that. That's great. Let's move on. Next question is for Jasmine to start with. This is coming from M. Testerman at Princeton University. In your experience, what are the biggest barriers to receiving help or assistance from the library?
That was a great question, and I remember I had laughed when I read it, only because I remember for me, when I first started grad school, I didn't know that the library was a resource. So the biggest barrier was just lack of knowledge or lack of awareness that the library, first of all, can't help you. I always just viewed it as somewhere to go and do my research or just go and do homework, because that's what I would do as an undergrad. I had never like checked out a book. I was like, why would I need to do that? And then suddenly you start familiarizing yourself with the new research method and you need all these books about this one method. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is kind of where the library can step in and be a resource. So for me, the biggest barrier was lack of awareness.
Where did your awareness start for you? Like, was there a particular moment when you said, oh, library?
I would say I had started asking some of the committee members that I was working with questions that they admitted they could not answer. And then they had redirected me, like, I think you should start with a librarian. And I was like, how do I start with a librarian? And then they were like, oh, there's a librarian that's attached to your college, to your area of study. And then that's how I got introduced to Hannah, because she's the librarian for fisheries and wildlife, which is related to my work in forestry. So that was my end.
So faculty helped make that connection.
Yes.
Okay, interesting, good. Other thoughts on barriers?
Totally agree. I think it's like, it really comes down to like you know, and not realizing that there's like this incredible resources available to you. And I think for me, it was a librarian came in and talked to us in like my first year seminar that we did. And that was really helpful. Like, whoa, you know, okay, so like there's all of these articles that I need online. There's Interlibrary loan, which totally saved my life when I was writing my dissertation. And, you know, I had no idea. Like, I think it's, you know, as an undergrad, it's a totally different experience researching. And so, yeah, so that was really helpful for me having a librarian come in.
Nice. Okay, thanks. Let's let Caitlin start this next question. It's from Marge Atkinson of Ask Marge Research Support Services. Do you feel you have adequate resources and services to support you in graduate school? Do you feel you need help with research or with literature reviews? And do you feel intimidated to seek help? A lot there.
I know, this is a great question or questions. So for the first part, I feel like we do have adequate resources and services to support us in graduate school. And part of that could be because I have worked for the graduate college and I know, you know, sort of firsthand what we do. But I don't always think that that translates very well to other graduate students. And so it really is still kind of figuring out the best way to communicate with grad students. And I think that's a work in progress. You know, like each class that you get has sort of different experiences and different backgrounds. And so it's really kind of like you can't just have one way of communicating and expect that to be the end all. But I think what's really important about the resources is that at UNLV, we do partner with units all over campus. And I think that allows us to make sure that we cover, you know, research, mentorship, communication, teaching, leadership, all of these different skills that would be almost impossible for one unit to cover well on their own. And so that's been awesome, just like building up partnerships across campus. For me, I don't feel intimidated to seek help, and I never really have, but it's a personality thing. But I think one way of helping is we do a campus climate survey. And some of the questions that we ask are like, what resources do you want to see on campus? What workshops do you want offered? And I think that's been a really eye-opening you know, data for us in terms of how to better serve our students. And we really do take that seriously. And, you know, we, within the next semester, offer kind of what's being asked or try to at least.
Great. Other thoughts?
I would say personally, I, in the beginning, definitely did feel intimidated to seek help from a reference librarian. It was not apparently traditional in my department to have a reference librarian be on the graduate committee. And just because my research focused on a document analysis, I was analyzing articles. I was like, well, I have to find the articles. So I'm going to have to work very closely with a reference librarian. So I didn't necessarily feel like going and seeking that help was something that was encouraged. And it was only just through my courage and me realizing like, this is what I need for my research. And yes, this is my research, that I continued to forge that relationship.
Yeah, I'd say it maybe is very personality dependent, because I work at the library and I'd still say I wouldn't necessarily know how to reach out to a librarian. Other than, I mean, like, I have Hannah, but she's pretty apart from my department. So if I were trying to find like a my designated librarian. I'd have no idea who that is or how I contact them. And maybe I could Google that, but I don't think I was 100% clear that that was even a thing until today, right now. So that there's still some variability in how much people are aware of. And for me, it was because like I could survive on my own. So maybe there were more resources that would have been helpful, but I had everything I needed at least.
So it sounds like the outreach can't be just that the libraries are here, but you got to kind of tailor it and get that discipline-specific angle out to everyone.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thanks. Next question comes from Louise Dice of Princeton University. This one's for Jacqueline. How much guidance do you receive from your faculty advisors about literature searching? Sorry.
I'm going to say when I started my master's, I'm in the doctorate program now, but when I started the master's program, I really didn't receive any guidance at all. It was kind of, here, write this paper, pick a topic on infectious diseases, and there you go. And so I did well just working with what I had, but it wasn't until I was told about, there's a course offered in our department called scientific writing, and it's actually an elective. I think it should be mandatory as one of your core classes, especially in a master's program. And I took this class just because I heard so many good things about it. And in that class, we actually had an appointment. One of our class sessions was to see and meet our department librarian. And then she taught a class for us. So we were in front of the computer and we basically looked up our topic that we were researching for our thesis. And then she showed us different, citation or reference management resources like RefWorks, Mendeley, things like that. She showed us how we can map out our research. And I learned so much just from taking that course, but that's where I became comfortable meeting with our librarian. So now I know Zan very well. I've met her a couple times, but without that course, I think I would still kind of be lost without just in my research, like organizing my research and how to keep track of all my references. So, so in the end, I actually did not receive not too much guidance on how to do a lit search until I took that course.
I see some nodding of heads.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I've maybe had a similar experience, only I didn't have a course quite like that. I'd say from my thesis advisor, at least, I've gotten a few book recommendations, things she advises me to look at based on what she reads of my work. Other people on my thesis committee have also chimed in with just a text here or there that I might look at. But as far as methods of research or how to go about doing that, there is maybe kind of this assumption that you already know how, which is just harder with those big projects, especially if you are trying out new methodologies. For example, last year I was trying to do some projects that involved more trying to find some historical artifacts and primary texts from the Victorian era. And I had no idea how to go about doing that, and very limited resources for places where I could actually access those. So I ended up kind of abandoning that project for multiple reasons, but the difficulty of even accessing those sources was one of them. And then I was going to say the other help I have gotten from my advisor has just been when I've asked directed questions. So one of the issues I ran into was learning how to research critical theory. That was very different from the kind of research I'd done in undergrad. And I was discovering that, even though I was good at searching with keywords and narrowing searches based on year and topic and whatever, that those weren't always pulling up the types of theoretical texts I needed. And so I had to ask my advisor about how to go about that, and learning that it becomes more about having to uncover this conversation and look and see who they're referencing, who has referenced them. That was a new mode of research for me, and I did learn about that from my advisor, but only after I was I'm not having any luck with the way I've been trying to do it. So
Good. I think this is going to dovetail well with the next question. And this is a great one because it's something I wonder about too. So what if a librarian came to a seminar class? Do you envision working with them in the classroom? And would you find this beneficial? It's kind of tough for the librarian to judge that because you are graduate students. You've got some background, so you don't want to necessarily start with the basics. But Callie, help me figure this out.
Yeah, I think that sounds like potentially a great idea. I mean, it would obviously depend on like what the seminar is about and how the librarian is coming in. But I have had kind of some similar interactions a little bit. I actually met Hannah because she came into like a teaching practicum I did when I was at GTA, teaching like the freshman composition class. And that was when I learned about interlibrary loans, Summit, all of that. So just as like a basic introduction to library resources, like potentially coming into a seminar like early fall term, if there are a lot of like new grad students, that could be a really good way to do that, I think. And then I've also had a couple seminar classes that have gone to special collections. And this might come up more later with some of our later questions that were specifically about special collections. But both of those class visits, I think, were very beneficial to just be talking to the librarian there, getting new perspectives, possibly, yeah, learning about new ways to interact with text, new ways to like look at research, think about research. Yeah, I think it would maybe take some work to tailor it to like what the seminar class is, and it would be very discipline dependent on, like, I think it would have to look different in every context. But I think the idea itself could be a great way to be forging new relationships between grad students and the librarians.
Those of you in other disciplines, does that sound about right to you?
Yes. Actually, Callie, you brought up an idea I was thinking while you were speaking was, in our department, new grad students have to go to a mandatory orientation. And that'd be great if our librarian actually spoke and if they introduced her, because then now it would be something where they're like, oh, I know her. She was the one that they recommended us to see when we started our thesis research, dissertation research. So that would actually, that's something I could bring to my department because they don't do that at our orientation.
I think one of the things too is we're talking about grad students, but there also needs to be outreach to faculty because a lot of this knowledge trickles down to grad students. And so what we're finding working at the grad college is that there's still sort of this, what we actually do is not what we did like a decade ago. And so, you know, kind of probably similar to you all. And so, you know, really it's going to department meetings to talk to faculty about what are the resources that we offer to graduate students. And then that kind of helps when we do have a workshop that, you know, faculty are more likely to let grad students go or to say like, hey, there's this workshop that might be beneficial because it's on citation management or whatnot. So that might also be something that as subject librarians that might be helpful would be to reach out to, you know, departments that you work with and say, hey, can I come talk to you at a faculty meeting and just sort of talk about like resources that we do offer and how I can help your students and that.
I would second that and say it's really important just to think about the library's role in providing practical advice, realizing that a lot of graduate students will get directions on what to do from their advisor, but not the how. And for me, I found that that's what I was missing a lot. My advisor would say, okay, go find articles on this and give me a lit review. And I'm like, I don't know where to find that. And then I would always have this mode of basically like a squirrel collecting acorns before winter. And I would just stockpile articles about this one topic. And then he'd ask for a lit review. And I'm like, here's a citation list. I have this information, but I found what you told me to find. I completed the literature search. The literature reading is another step that I haven't necessarily got to. So for me, the library actually gave me like the practical advice. Okay, this is what I'm supposed to do, but this is how I was supposed to do it.
What to do, but not how. Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So it has to be a team effort, really. Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. We've got a question. What kind of education have you gotten in research data management, and what was the source for that? Jasmine, would you start us off?
Yes, I would start off with a funny story because my first interaction with our data management librarian was not until I had already screened 6,000 sources and then decided that that was my data. And I contacted her and I was like, yeah, you know, I feel like I'm supposed to have a data management plan, but I didn't have one before I started my research. She was like, yes, you're typically supposed to think about how you're managing your data before you actually have it. And I was like, that was never clear. Can you help me? And she was like, well, you already did it. You already, I don't know how to actually help you. So kind of thinking about the steps that are involved in data management was something that never phased my mind. I just ended up realizing I have all this work. Okay, cool, I'm a type A person, I'm organized, that's great, Excel's amazing, but I was like, I feel like there could be an easier way to do this. She was like, yes, we literally have software that can help you. And I was like, okay, cool. So it would have been awesome if I had known like data management was a thing. I was doing it on my own, not realizing that that was a process in its own. So I just ended up contacting a librarian, like, I feel like I'm supposed to rely on you. I feel like I need your help. And she was like, yeah, you know, maybe 6 months ago, but you got it. That was my first introduction to data management, was just contacting our librarian.
That's a great story. That's something a lot of librarians are learning about too. So kind of a new frontier.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything to?
I do. I'm going to start my dissertation research this summer. So I'm actually going to see our librarian, Zan, again sometime in the summer before I just start anything. Because I'm like you, Jasmine, where I'm like, there has to be a more efficient way to do this. Because I'm an organized person too, but I'm like, it just looks like a mess though, you know? So I definitely feel you on that. And I'm glad I'm hearing about this because I'm going to start that this summer.
Nice. Okay, so here's the longest question of the list of questions I've got. It's for Caitlin, so here we go. It's a great question. At my institution, workshops for graduate students are offered by the library, the writing centers, and the grad college. We're starting to coordinate and collaborate a little bit more, but I think that we sometimes inadvertently split our intended audience of graduate students who are busy people with complicated schedules. At your institutions, do you avail yourselves of the workshops and services intended for grad students that are offered by different entities, including the libraries? Do you tend to favor the offerings of one entity over others? And if so, why? Do you think that different entities on your campus could do a good job of coordinating their services more?
All right, so this is awesome. We're working at the grad college. I have a very unique perspective. So I was really excited to see this question because I think really a couple of years ago, we were in the same boat where we were all offering workshops. They were the same, we had a lot of repeats. There was 20 CV and resumes workshops that we were doing. And so kind of a couple of the ways that we started to streamline workshops that were being offered were through committees. And so we have one committee that focuses both on undergraduate and graduate workshops, and anyone that offers a workshop has a seat on this committee. So it's writing center, libraries, campus, career services, grad college, I think faculty center now. And we literally have a spreadsheet each semester of like everything that we want to offer. And we start looking at, okay, well, if this is a repeat, you know, who really has that area of expertise? And that's who should offer it. And so that's been, I think, really helpful in not having just an overlap of workshops. And then we do the same thing at the grad level. We have our own like professional development academy, and we have a committee for that helps us figure out workshops for each semester. And then we have a bunch of programming for graduate students. So we have what's called academic support certification. So it's not credit, but they're 3 year-long programs. And each of these have a series of workshops that are required. And we make sure that, you know, we include library workshops, career services workshops, writing center workshops, so that, you know, grad students get a whole bunch of different perspectives on, you know, how to do research, how to do mentorship, how to do communication. And so I think that's how we have worked on, you know, not sort of being like, oh, you can only go to the grad college workshops, you know, for the certification program, is really figuring out, you know, you guys offer awesome research workshops, you know, on, you know, building a PowerPoint, you know, building a poster presentation, you know, doing different stats programming. Like, we don't need to offer that. That's not our specialty. And so I think that's been like really good, is just being like sitting at a table together and just sort of saying, you know, hey, this is what we're, you know, we specialize in, and, and being really strategic about that. And I think that's helped our workshop numbers. So.
Yeah, it kind of takes the pressure off each of the entities too, as we can focus on our specialties. But other panelists, do you feel like you're bombarded in a confusing way with all these workshops we want you to attend, or?
Yeah.
Not so much? Okay.
I would say I sometimes will gear myself more towards workshops that are offered by the graduate school here, only because I realize that they focus more on the accessibility of the workshop, realizing that it's really important to externalize whatever information a student would gain by going to that workshop by doing such things such as providing a PDF copy of the agenda, who are the speakers, can you just post the PowerPoint presentation and any other notes that the speaker had. So what I'll do sometimes is just register for a workshop, knowing that even if I can't physically make it, they'll send out a link right after saying, here are all the documents from this workshop. I would more so favor workshops that do that, just because it can be tough sometimes to hoard all this information that you can only get if you're there in person. But now realizing, okay, I have this PDF. I know another friend who's also interested who couldn't go. I'm just gonna send them the PDF.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, it doesn't have to be necessarily in the classroom that you're delivering the material, and being deliberate about that. Yeah, I think there's some potential there. Great, thanks. Next question is for Jasmine. We know that some grad students use and are super appreciative of interlibrary loan services, while others never use them, relying instead on access to local collections and to online sources like library databases, open access sources, legal and sometimes illegal modes of social sharing of full text. How would you advise us to reach out to more students to let them know that library resource sharing specialists, especially interlibrary loan, can and want to support their research?
That's a really good question. I had to start using interlibrary loan a lot more when I was trying to familiarize myself with different methods for my work. I had no intentions on using interlibrary loan because I would just gather all of my information from like Google Scholar. And then it wasn't until I started running into like actual text, so I was like, okay, I guess this doesn't exist anywhere else. So then I kind of had to learn, like, step out of just reading scholarly articles and like go back to reading books, because that was a huge transition for me. I just felt like a scholarly article was easier to digest as opposed to an entire text, like an entire book. But I realized that once I had decided, like, yes, this is the research that I need, I would just check in with the interlibrary loan all the time. If there was a text I requested that I couldn't find, I'd be like, hey, you know, it's really important. I need it. Where is it? Can you help me? And they'd be like, oh, well, it was never indexed properly, or this library said they can't find it. So I realized there's an even larger process to me just requesting a book on my end of the library, thinking like, no, there's an entire process of finding it and making sure it's stored properly. So for me, interlibrary loan was a really helpful resource.
Yeah, I'd say I couldn't have written a single paper in grad school without interlibrary loan. Part of that is being in English, just almost every single type of source I need, you know, like there are a few that I can find just online. Every now and then the library will actually have the text I need, but almost everything I'm having to request. So just desperation made it easy for me to discover interlibrary loan.
Nothing like library desperation. Excellent. Cool. All right, here's one for Callie. What do you know about archives, special collections, and rare books in the libraries that you use? How do you think the library can best promote this type of unique material? And that question is coming from Carol Hinchliffe from the University of Melbourne.
Yes, that is a great question. And I kind of referenced some of my connection with special collections earlier, which is that I've had 2 seminar classes that took us on a little field trip to special collections. Both days were very, very like memorable class days and very interesting. The first was the kind of like intro to grad studies class that is required for all MAs in English. So all of us were new grad students, and that was like a really useful way to learn first off that special collections exist. And just meeting with the librarian at special collections, you know, she was able to tell us some of like what they do there. We got to like interact with a few texts. So that itself was just kind of a really good way to have an introduction. And then we went back to special collections for a Victorian collections class I was in. So again, like they had like a really good disciplinary connection with the specific seminar. We spent like the whole, I think it was like a 3-hour class, and we spent a lot of that time looking at specific artifacts. My professor had developed some like questions for us to be responding to. So I think my professor and the librarian had kind of collaborated on how we were going to be approaching this special collections visit. So that was like a really helpful introduction. The one other thing, though, I would say that was maybe less helpful is I found the special collections website was a little hard for me to navigate. So I mentioned earlier as well that I'd wanted to be doing this project that would have necessitated some more work with special collections. And I was trying to do some searching to figure out if they had things on my topic, and was kind of running into some barriers. And if I'd actually reached out to the librarian, I maybe could have gotten some clearer answers. But I do know, at least with me personally, I'm pretty independent, and I like not having to interact with other humans in my research. So for me, that like not being able to find things on the website was kind of a quick shutdown there. So I think, yeah, maybe a balance of both would be nice. I think the special collections here, I had some really great in-person experiences. And the website, there are a lot of things there. It was hard for me to figure out like how to navigate it, and that wasn't something that was addressed in our visits. So that would maybe be nice to have more of a balance, but.
Awesome. Okay. We have time for one last of our prepared questions, and we'll turn over to the chat questions. Allison Ricker from Oberlin and Anna Sogbo both asked kind of similar questions, and this is kind of neat. It's a chance to kind of zoom out from the graduate experience and look at your higher education as a whole. So what effect do you think your level of engagement with the library as an undergraduate had on your current level of engagement with the library as a graduate student?
So as an undergrad, I lived in the library. I was a biology major. So Monday through Sunday, I was here right when the library opened and stayed till it closed on, intense periods of time. So during finals. I never actually used any of the resources because as a bio major, I did more lab work. So research papers weren't part of our gig then. Now, I would have liked to have learned more about the research methodology as an undergrad. And I know I said this before for grad students, but having a mandatory course on the method of research, like looking through the research, understanding what knowledge gaps are, and then forming your hypothesis. That would have been very helpful for me as an undergrad to understand graduate school, because I actually applied to the master's program not knowing what I'd be getting into. I told myself, if I get accepted, I'm just going to try this out and see how it goes. And I ended up loving it, but I was surprised at what I didn't know going into grad school. So I think as an undergrad, also because I was a bio major, everyone was going to apply to med school, veterinary school, dental school. No one had any intention of research. So I think with having that, I think I would have gone more, and I did go the more research route, but I intended on applying to medical school. But once I got into grad school, I actually loved the research side and decided to stick with it.
Okay. Okay.
So I'd say I actually have a fairly different background. To start with, I barely ever stepped foot in the library in undergrad. It may be like glaringly obvious by this point that I'm kind of a homebody, but yeah, I've always done like all my studying at home. I was always really confused by the people who are just like staying up all night working in the library. Like, why do you want to do that to yourself? And I didn't use like physical books at all in undergrad. I was, really sticking to those that I could access easily online. But I did have kind of a similar, I think, gap in my understanding of research and what you do with research. So I majored in English in undergrad. So in a lot of ways, like my field has stayed pretty consistent. But in undergrad with writing papers, it would be much more like I write what I want to write and I'm going to find sources that support what I'm saying or that provide a counter argument. Like it was kind of more using sources to do what I want to do, rather than in grad school, I think kind of a more complex view of research where you are actually trying to understand what other people have said. You're looking for that kind of gap in the literature. And that was not something I had conceived of at all in undergrad. So more of that early on would have been nice. But other than that development, I do think in some ways, like my relationship to the library has stayed the same. I still do not really study here. I do come and use a lot of physical texts now. I've mentioned I love Interlibrary loan. I check out books by the stack and the circulation librarians, I think, know me by name. Make jokes about how often I am there and how often they are having to reshelve my books. So that's changed. And I think it would be beneficial, if undergrads had more interaction with like that side of the library as well. But
I would definitely second that and say that my discipline had a lot to do with the way I related to the library. Because as an undergrad, I also majored in forestry. My focus was more so being outside. Again, I still had a lot of labs where I was out in the woods. So I was like, I viewed the library in a very different way than I do now. I remember I want to say it was my junior or senior year. Like for me, going to the library was basically almost like similar to going downtown. Like I knew everybody was about to be in the library during finals week. I could see all my friends, all the classes I'm struggling with. I know everyone's going to be there. So that was more so why I went. I could not fathom why there were 6 floors in the library, but I was like, that's an option for me to study and see people. I would just ride the elevators, pick a different study spot like every other hour. For me, that was the library. I was like, I don't know why these books are here, but this is a really cool study space. So now as a grad student, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, Interlibrary loan, please, is my book here yet? I'm checking in the circulation desk all the time. I'm having meetings with reference librarians. So it definitely has changed a lot as a graduate student.
Yeah, it's totally different from undergrad, I think. Yeah. Great. Okay. I see that the chat window has been really active, which is great. Hannah, do you have a couple of questions you can maybe pull out of that for our panelists?
Definitely. So I'm going to try and mush a few together, and I'm going to try and highlight some that I think have not been discussed at all yet. So the first one that I've seen, and I'm going to mush a little bit, is about peer learning opportunities. And so some questions have come up related to whether you would consider either giving a workshop as a grad student to other grad students, or if you would attend, maybe even be more likely to attend workshops offered by other grad students.
So this is tricky. So I think we actually have so like at the grad college, we're more hesitant to allow grad students to do their own workshops. And just because we've gotten like kind of mixed feedback on it, but I think if it was one of those ideas where, you did a workshop and you learned from someone else and it was sort of like passing the knowledge down, but it was really specific about kind of what you wanted to, work on with colleagues in your department, that might be different. But I think in terms of like building our own workshop, building all of the contents, that would be tricky, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with the idea of like, if I were putting on a workshop for other grad students would just be the time commitment involved to actually make it like a really beneficial workshop. And then I don't know how I feel about the idea of attending a workshop by another grad student. I think it would really depend on like what the topic was and who they were. Because I'm trying to think whether like I'd be more likely to attend if it was like someone I knew, or if it would feel weirder to have someone who is my peer like taking that kind of like authority.
So I would say that was the feedback that we got, was like, why isn't there a librarian or faculty member doing this? So you brought that up.
Well, it just seems to me like you would have the possibility more of, I don't know, people who don't necessarily have the kind of above view. Because I don't know, I feel like grad students all have like very different approaches and experiences in a lot of ways. And so it would have to be presented in a way that it wasn't so much like telling you how it should be done, so much as sharing like what has worked for them, or something like that. Because it is, I think, a librarian or a professor might have like encountered the situation in a lot of different contexts, might have seen how different people deal with it, in a way that maybe other grad students, they might not have that kind of view of the situation.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind for me is thinking about the power dynamics involved in a graduate student giving a workshop to other graduate students, realizing that there is a lot of times in higher education a power differential between who's seen as like the giver and provider of knowledge, as opposed to who's always viewed as a student. So if there was a graduate student, like for example, I know that I identify as someone who has a background in science communication and in public speaking. So for me, thinking about putting together a workshop is not tough, but realizing that if there's already this basically, I guess, implicit bias in the fact that like, oh, graduate students don't give workshops about maybe things that's not your career, that's not your specialty, or there's a librarian that can do that, why are you doing it? Just kind of thinking about sometimes the stereotypes that we attach to like who our presenter is. I had saw that Nancy Gibson had mentioned like why not have a combined workshop between like a faculty, a librarian, and a graduate student. I think that would be a great platform, honestly, just in terms of keeping in mind like making sure that everyone's coming to the table and able to have a voice.
I definitely think that experience does matter. I haven't taken a workshop from a grad student, but I did take an actual summer school course taught by a grad student. She was a PhD student, and it was a SAS programming course. And she had many years of experience in SAS programming. So I could, even more than some of our faculty, so I could definitely trust her on what she was doing and how she was teaching us, even though she was one of my peers. So I think because some people they get their master's and they work for 10 years and they come back and get their doctorate. So it's kind of one of those things, it just depends on their experience for me.
All right, so I'm going to switch to another mashup of questions. And this question goes back to something that was discussed a little bit before. So asking how much maybe your advisor in particular was involved with helping you work on research strategies, but then somebody else recognizing the importance of, kind of like Caitlin was saying, of talking to faculty because they're here longer term. If you all have any suggestions based on your observations of faculty, what works to have conversations with them? So both pieces, how much would you look to your advisor for input, and what do you think shapes your advisor's view of the library or helps them learn about sources?
So my advisor retired when I graduated, but I say that because, he was at a very different, he was a senior academic. And so kind of his perspective of what the libraries offered wasn't necessarily what the libraries was, and no fault of his, right? Just he had used it for different reasons, and I kind of continue to do so. And so a lot of kind of how I learned about the libraries was through attending workshops and him telling me information and me being like, I wonder if that's true. And then like reaching out and, seeing. So I think one of the ways that we have found that's been really helpful is to target younger faculty or faculty that are just starting, because I think, then as soon as, they start having grad students, they know all of the resources that are available. And so that's been really helpful for us.
I would say my advisor's relationship to the library as they were studying as a graduate student dictated a lot of the information that I received. Realizing that my former advisor had this idea like he was an independent researcher. He just found everything on his own by himself and was just an amazing scholar. And I was like, that does not work for me. I would like to learn in a community environment. Peer learning is definitely something I'm an advocate for. So realizing I didn't have an issue with relying on other resources such as the library.
All right, I'm gonna ask one last question that's different from this set. So how important do you think it is for graduate students to have a dedicated space in the library?
I think so important. And I think especially Jasmine, you brought up the community aspect, right? And so grad students, we sort of are in these silos and, you know, we forget that there's like this whole outside world. There's other people that aren't in our departments, and having a space where you can do work and meet other grad students is so important. So, like, we have the grad commons at UNLV, and I think it's just a wonderful area where, you know, you can have study groups, you know, there's a conference room that's available. You can do your thesis and dissertation defense there. And I think for a lot of people that don't have, you know, necessarily family here too, or international students, that really becomes their home away from home. And so I think it's absolutely critical.
I would second that and say I think it's critical too, realizing that not every graduate student has a working space or a lab attached to wherever they are. I shuffle around campus a lot, so thinking about, okay, is there one space I know that is designated for graduate students in the library would be really cool.
I'd speculate also that, yeah, the departments that maybe have less of a built-in community, like that it's really important for those students as well. So I am in like a very small and like tight-knit cohort, and we do have like working spaces. So I know most people in my program kind of stick to the English building, for example. But, you know, we've been talking about a grad student space at the library here. And that's kind of one of the things, is that every department has a very different community, has different resources for its students. And so that it's important to have those resources for students who aren't getting it from their department.
I was going to say too, like, we offer workshops in the graduate student space, which is really helpful in getting, you know, graduate students to know about the space, but then to actually use the space too. And like we'll do during finals week, there'll be like coffee and cookies or coffee and bagels in the grad commons. And so just kind of like ways that, you know, to show like appreciation for grad students too, because we are like key to, you know, any university mission. And so kind of things like that get them in there is also helpful.
And free has a massage chair.
Oh, the library does have dogs, like puppies, and that's always, or goats. That's always super like popular.
Therapy dogs.
Yes,
Yeah.
great during finals.
Well, speaking of appreciation for graduate students, we owe you guys a big thank you. Your insights, very helpful. Thank you for everyone who sent in questions. I'm really happy with the discussion we had. So thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Callie. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Jacqueline. This has been great. So look out for more coming from the interest group for academic library services to graduate students. We have a session coming up at ALA Annual in Washington, D.C. That'll be June 22nd, 1 to 2 p.m. We've got a series of lightning round presentations on issues of libraries serving graduate students. That's all for me. Hannah, anything to add?
Just that I put a link in for feedback. I put it in there a couple times. I'll put it in again in case it gets lost in the thank yous. But we would love to hear both ideas for future panels, as well as, you know, anything that didn't work for you. That's great for us to hear about too. So feel free to give your feedback.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alois, for setting us up with this excellent webcast today.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.